but I don't want Sharon to have to hurry up her talk because what she's going to talk about is so important. So it may take us a little bit past our normal get up and talk to each other time, but we'll still have time for that. So please give a warm round of applause for one of the smartest people I know, Sharon Hanek.
This is about teamwork. It's not about being smart. I learned a lot from my friends, the other Watchdog moms, some of whom might be in the room. And we all share information and we all research and have different strengths that we can help support each other so that we can get all this knowledge. I'll have to say, among my friends that are research moms and Watchdog moms and dads, I have to say that they have said that Moses had Aaron and we have Sharon, which is why you'll see my face out there the most as far as speaking, and they aren't. It doesn't mean that I know more than they do, it's just that I guess I have the mouth, or I like being on stage. Today's title is From Public Schools to Government Schools. This is a little different from what I have spoken before, but I've been here, so I'm hoping that I won't be repeating too much information if you've already heard me speak in other places. But I want to start off with that thought of public schools versus government schools. So when you think of public schools, you are thinking of maybe what you grew up with, your classrooms. You had the teacher standing in front of the room, and if you knew the answer, you raise your hands and answer the question and get called on. Versus, this is what you went through. These schools were often created in your neighborhood. They lived in your neighborhood. You had school boards, possibly, that were from your neighborhood. The whole feeling of this was local. And way back when public schools got started, it was because they wanted in America, they wanted you to learn how to read so that you could read the Bible. And that many of the schools were really just religious institutions to try to get people to learn and get closer to the roots of America, which was the Judeo-Christian value system. Today we have what I call government schools. And I want you to all remember that the public schools you went to are not the same as the government schools of today. So many people find it difficult to listen to me speak because they're thinking I'm criticizing their school. It might even be the same teacher they had and now their kids have that teacher. But I want to say things have changed. And the change is not because the person has changed, not the teacher, not the principal, not even maybe your neighborhood school system, but it's because of the government's involvement and intrusion and other major influences. So now you're going to be looking at schools, and instead of books and paper and pencil, everyone's going to be on the internet or their little iPad. This one here is another example of schools in elementary school where it says, children learn by witnessing objects' actions and reactions. So that's called constructivism. It's a different way of thinking where children learn more when they discover and create their information themselves. There is no absolute answers. That's what I mean by government schools of today. And I want to go through first about having you think what the change is. And I guess what I'm really saying is there is a change. And hopefully by the end of the first few slides you'll realize things have changed. And then we'll go over how the change happened, which is going back in history. So think about it. What is education? Is education the transferring of knowledge? Or is it the passing down of your culture? Or is it voting the right way? Or having the correct behavior and being happy? What should education, what do you want your schools to do? And by the way, if voting the correct way means putting Sharon Hanek as your writing candidate, yes, I would like that. That is from an actual Kitsap County ballot that somebody here sent me. So there is a shift. There's a shift in philosophy driving education. If curriculum is not simply putting some facts in kids' minds, and it isn't teaching the past history of the world. That's one of the shifts. We no longer see the teaching of facts and information as the primary outcome of education. The earlier that we can intervene in the lives of people, the more effective we can be. The purpose of education in schools is to change the thoughts, feelings, and actions of children And good teaching is defined as challenging the student's fixed beliefs. Fixed beliefs is what you as parents give your child. And now we're asking the system, the school system, is to challenge those fixed beliefs. This is from Dr. Shirley McCune in a conference to the governors in 1989. So think about this. Every governor, maybe the president's also there, they're all sitting in this big room, they're having their lunch, it's a great meal. And the speaker comes out and says these statements. And maybe you might have one governor that's kind of looking around going, oh, that's odd. But if no one else speaks up, this is where you need to have strong leaders. They're all sitting there saying, oh, I guess that must be okay. And at the end of the night, they all give a standing ovation. No one challenged her. And everyone walked away thinking, oh, this must be the new way to do education. And one by one, all the states began to fall and change. In Washington State, the current law says, a basic education is an evolving program of instruction that is intended to provide students with the opportunity to become responsible and respectful global citizens and to enjoy productive and satisfying lives. Essentially, they need to be very global and very un-American, and they need to be working, productive, and satisfied, which means they have to be happy. So we have an education system that is striving to make all children global, working, and happy. By the way, how do you pay for that? How do you pay for happiness? What do we have with the McCleary decision where we're going to pay for basic education? I've got a real problem with that. How do you pay for happiness? So what's going on? I believe we are rewiring the brain. It is not simply just dumbing down. It is changing the way children are going to be making decisions. It is changing their value system. They will no longer have logical thinking skills. There are no absolutes. There's going to be groupthink over individual thinking, and a lot of control over the outcomes, primarily the outcome of thought. I had to add this in. If any of you know me, I always have my little lava lamp and rock thinker, but there are two ways of thinking. One of the ways of thinking is the rock thinker. That is where you have concrete, sequential thinking, logic, facts, absolutes. The second way of thinking I call the lava lamp thinker. I believe what Adina was talking about was a lava lamp representative. Because a lava lamp thinker makes their decisions based upon things other than facts, logic, and truth. They make their decisions because they're in this warm body of water and they're floating around and it feels really good, and all the peers think the same way they do. So that's their truth. And even if you broke apart and went to a new globe, that becomes your new truth. So that's what I believe we are creating as a society of lava lamp thinkers whose method of thinking is dependent more on how many people in the room think the same way they do, the popular kid in the room. It might be money, it might be power, but that's more influential than actual logic, facts, and concrete thinking skills. Did this happen on purpose, or is this an accident? You know, this one I really ponder about, and I don't know if it's intentional or if it's accidental, but I believe we have two wicked witches. The wicked witch of the east and the wicked witch of the west, who influenced all the education system. On one hand, we might have big businesses creating human resources. On the other hand, we have a new thought, a new way of thinking. And they are striving to create the human potential where everyone is happy and reaches their own full potential. I call it inside the box thinking. Who got us here? Some of the things and patterns that influenced is the progressive thought. Horace Mann, John Dewey. We have the Marxist, socialist, communist thought influences. We have Nazis. And you know, the SS and Hitler had a religion that was a lot based on theosophy. So theosophical New Age viewpoints. And then you have the human potential, human resources. if any of you question that the government is involved in human resources, I want you to keep in mind that round about the late 1980s, that the U.S. government decided not just to have a Department of Education, but that the Department of Education would be part of the Department of Labor. So that as they went towards that goal, here's a book called Learning and Living, a Blueprint for High Performance, Scans Report for America 2000, sponsored by the U.S. government and Economics and Labor, is now telling schools what they need to do. A whole section on how schools that will work, organizing education for higher performance, work-based learning. A lot of what we see today has actually been printed out in this book, Goals to the America 2000 Scans Report. So we have to look at things. How did this group of thinkers, progressive, Marxist, socialist, communist, how did they get so influential that they affected the U.S. education system? Part of it is if you have to follow the money trail. It's governments and NGOs, non-government organizations. When I say follow the money trail, it's not just federal grants, but many of the organizations that came out of these different movements influence leaders in our country. And so I would say that the non-government organizations are just as powerful as the U.S. federal government in controlling the laws, influencing laws, and making sure that the outcome is what they want it to be. They did it through different methods, like the Alinsky method, the Saul-Alinsky method, the Delphi technique, using change agents, facilitators. What I said about the National Governors Conference, you bring in the great speakers. Recently, well, not recently, about 2007, Patagonia, that's a well-known company. Patagonia brought in Tom Brokaw, very influential, he's on the TV and everything, and they brought him in to do a speech. The speech was on Yosemite to Yukon, Y2Y situation. And after they had that little speech in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, every one of those participants signed on to the Y2Y treaty. So that's what I mean when I say you've got the NGOs and the big businesses coming together, doing great meals for our politicians, and at the end of the day, the politicians are feeling really good, they have their tummies full, and they're saying, yeah, well, give me that piece of paper, I'll vote for that. I'll run your bill for you. That's part of how we got here. Then you have the outcome-based agenda, because everything, the outcome was already orchestrated for us. And now we're just all following through. And when they did that, they also had to make sure that they had people involved. So they would have all these group meetings and things so that you might be able to participate, and then they use the Delphi technique to control you so that you don't say no against their ideas. So we have the major influence now. We know that there are the governments, the nonprofits are the non-government organizations, the schools of education, and I threw in another one called online curriculum or the internet. When teachers create the curriculum nowadays, they don't start off by saying, okay, I want my child to learn how to add, and what is a really good book on how to add and subtract and multiply and divide. No, they go to the internet and they say, what's a great website to use to help teach my kids? And they'll go to the bookmakers and say, which books have the best tools? Which comes with that little CD-ROM so that I don't have to create my own test. I can just stick this in and print off their tests. Which one has the best bells and whistles? It's not about looking at the core issue of knowledge and what should be taught. It's about looking at the system of teaching and what makes it easiest for them to do. Also, of course, with teachers, it's what their principals and the office superintendent and other folks, curriculum directors tell them to do. We have to look at education changes in a system. And the system works like this. You have a shared vision where somebody's idea is now being sold to the public, to the governors, to you, to the teachers. And that vision is often in the form of a standard, a set of standards. After you have a set of standards, after you have that vision and commitment to the vision, you always have a change of assessments. Because you have to measure if your vision is going to be met or not. So the second step is the feedback system, the assessments, the testing system. Then you always see changes in the details. You're going to change the pedagogy, which is the methodology of teaching. You're going to change the curriculum. You're going to change the laws, the WACs, which is the Washington Administrative Code, so that everyone now is forced to use these changes in curriculum and methods of teaching. You have to control the leaders, and you use money, manipulation, and I put in teacher evaluation. Today, lots of teachers left their classroom to go testify against the teacher evaluation bills. It's not because they don't want to be checked on. It's because they know that the measurement tool, which fits their standards, is a faulty measurement tool, and it's going to give false results. And now their jobs are on the line based on a faulty measurement tool. That's what was going on today at 10 o'clock in the hearing rooms. So how did we get to where we are? Going back a little bit into the history, we have the beginning of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 1965. That was when the federal government says, I think I'm going to get involved in education. I'm just going to assist everyone and provide guidance. Then they created the creation of the Department of Education, passed in 79, created in 1980. So now you have a bureaucracy. And in that bureaucracy, there became 9 regions, actually 10 if you include Virgin Islands and some of those other countries that are not exactly U.S., Puerto Rico. And then you have the creation of the Goals 2000. That is the beginning of what we call the standards-based movement. Prior to having standards, we just assumed all the children would learn how to add and subtract in first grade, and then in second grade they would do a little more, maybe a little bit of fractions, and there was a sequence of knowledge, like a staircase. You first learn this, and then after you master that, you can go on to the next thing. And then in third grade, you're learning to multiply, and then you master that. Fourth grade, you learn to divide, and you go on so that in junior high, you can do simple algebra things. And that sets you up so that when you get to high school, you can do calculus and all the other higher level math classes. It's progressively a step program. We think of those as standards. And so using that terminology on what I call bait and switch, we moved into something called the standards-based movement, reform education, performance-based education. And all those terms mean that a new set of words, a new set of standards has been created, and we all have to do those standards. Now, I've often wondered, why is it that if 2 + 2 = 4 never changes, and the standards is based in knowledge, that we have to change our test every time we change the standards? But that's what's going on. That happened back in the Goals 2000. Some states started that in 1990s. Washington State started in 1993. And so as we move forward to today, in the beginning, some of those standards were actually based in knowledge. Today, we've gotten quite a bit away from that. So we have this beginning called Goals 2000 in 1994, beginning of the standards-based system. Then we had to create a set of tests. Because in Goals 2000, the federal government went to all 50 states and said, you know, you're very unique. Washington State, you're different from Alabama, you're different from Mississippi. So you need to create your own set of standards that fits your state, that fits your community. So one by one, all 50 states were encouraged to create their own set of standards. What happens next from standards? You have tests. So that means all 50 states now had to develop their own assessment system, their testing system, to measure your standards. Side note here, test is something that you take to see if you have a certain amount of knowledge. You take your driver's test. You might take your food handler's test. You learn your knowledge and then you check to see if you have that. An assessment is an evaluation on if they think you met the standard, not the knowledge, the standard. If the standard is tied to knowledge, then you're testing on knowledge. If the standard is not tied to knowledge, then you're just checking to see if they can do whatever the words of the standard are correctly. It does not mean it's the same thing as knowledge. So now you have this new assessment system, just like you assess your property taxes. It is a subjective evaluation to see if the child met the standard. You have your assessment system, and that's what No Child Left Behind was about. Every state created their own assessment system, and now there was a check to make sure that the children met that assessment, using the assessment to meet their standards. That happened, we went through that for a while until the year 2009 when we had Race to the Top. Race to the Top was the first bill that was different in that most of the times you get the federal grant money and then you jump through the hoops. With Race to the Top, the administration said, in order for you to put in your application to get the federal grant money, you must prove to me that you're going to jump through my hoops and change your laws. So one by one, every state, or 45 states, changed their state laws so that they can simply put in the application form to get the grant money, of which only 2 states got the grant money on the first round.
Oh.
And all the other states did not get the grant money. But we changed our laws so that we were in full federal compliance, even though we did not get the grant money. That's what Race to the Top was about. And Race to the Top had embedded in it many things, including Common Core. What was interesting about the Race to the Top Common Core then was the federal government came around and said, we need to have portability. We need to have a set of standards so that kids can move from one state to the other and that they'll have a common set of standards. So it always bothered me that the same federal government who went out in 1994 and said, gee, we want all 50 states to create their own set of standards, is coming back in the year 2010 saying, oh my gosh, all 50 states have 50 different standards, we all messed up, we need to get to one standard. So the same federal government is coming back and saying we have to consolidate to one set of standards. That's what's going on with Common Core. But the other big change was we all changed and have now accepted this thing called performance-based standards, reform education, and essentially outcome-based standards. So Common Core came along in 2010 with the new assessment systems. I said that when everything got started, we had the federal government and the Department of Education, and we had educational labs. There are 9 education labs. You can see that the country is divided into 9 regions. I find it very interesting that they use the name Regional Educational Laboratories. What happens in laboratories? Experimentations. So now the country is divided into 9 separate regions which assist the states in their region to make sure that they have the right outcomes of education system. Dr. Shirley McCune, who I quoted earlier, was in charge of McREL, which is the Kansas-Denver Mid-Continental, central area. She was in charge of that laboratory. And later on, she moved to Washington State to help write the WASO in the year 1994, or 1995, somewhere around there. So going now into Washington State. In 1987, Mark Tucker proposed the National Center on Education and Economy, NCEE. It was a non-government organization think tank to promote education reform policies. In 1989, the National Governors Conference, the National Governors Association has a little conference. And at that point, the NCEE came more in prominence and established. In 1991, Governor Booth Gardner signed an executive order, 91-04, which especially said that Washington State will do a performance-based education system. The key thing was it was an executive order because the legislature did not pass it. The results were that we have a new standard, and the creation of the new standard. And if any of you remember the Commission of Student Learning, that was all part of this. And then after that commitment to performance-based education, we have in 1992 and 1993 a series of contracts that were signed with Mark Tucker's organization, the NCEE, and other similar organizations to create the standards. So we have this organization called NCEE who went around to many, many states and helped them write the standards for their states. There's National Alliance for Restructuring Education. I just love the word restructuring education. I just wonder. We have the University of Washington Center for Reinventing of Education. That's the Teachers College. So something new has happened. In March of 1993, there were more contracts, and I have copies of signed contracts that were commitment to creating the standards before the law was passed that approved that we could write the standards. It was in May of 1993 that Washington State passed House Bill 1209, which established reform education. Notice all the contracts that were signed before the law was passed. That's what happened. And then we have in 2010 Race to the Top. What is interesting to me is I gave you some names, NCEE and the name Phil Darrow, the New Standards Project. He came to Washington State in the early 90s to help Washington State write their standards. He went to other states to help them write their standards because he went around in the year 2009 and 10 telling everyone he is the father of Common Core math standards. And so Pearson put him out there, he's got videos and everything, saying that he is the author of the Common Core standards. However, today, you won't hear his name, you hear other names. And I believe that if you were to research Common Core today, you're going to find a lot of the true history wiped off the websites. In the world of the internet, they only let you see what they want you to see. And so anyone researching Common Core may miss some of the true things that happened that led up to it. A lot of the documents that I have are because I was looking into, it wasn't named Common Core yet, but we knew there was a new standards-based movement that was nationalizing standards. And so in 2007, 8, and 9, I was able to gather lots of documentation before they got put away. So we have the system of reform. We have the standards, the assessment, the curriculum changes, and you have the teacher evaluation. All of them to keep us in line to the correct outcome. We also have data collections and tracking to monitor that everything is being done correctly. Just a side note then about Common Core. When I talk about how Common Core is implemented, I don't think any state, any legislator read the Common Core standards before they voted on it. In Texas, Robert Scott, superintendent of Texas, said, I was told I needed to sign a letter agreeing to Common Core, and I asked if I might read them first. I was told they hadn't been written, but they still wanted my signature on it. This is very common, and one by one, as the states adopted Common Core, same thing happened. They did not read it. So there's a change then. We no longer have these tests, the bubble-in norm reference tests, which tested to see if you had skills and knowledge. Instead, we have a new assessment piece, which is very process-based, and I have some examples on the back table. And this is what Common Core would look like. This is actually part of the measurement of student progress, but they're very similar. You have, the question is, every third child is wearing red, every fifth child is wearing blue, what is the 15th child wearing? Could be either red and blue or purple. Both are correct answers, and you don't need to know your numbers to do it. This is another example of some of the fuzzy math. This child is supposed to think about a number and write in her journal all about the number. I bring in teacher evaluations because I think this is the hammer that keeps the teachers in line. I talked with the Seattle Times the other day, and she kept saying, it's the teachers that's the problem, not Common Core, because the teachers are choosing that curriculum. And I said, no, there is a hammer. whether it's peer pressure or something else that's going on, that's keeping every school district, every teacher, every principal in line that they are going to do Common Core curriculum. There's not one public school in the state of Washington that is not going to do a Common Core curriculum. So there's a hammer in there. It's not just saying these are the standards, you can use whatever you want to get there. No, there's something more. Part of that something more is called teacher evaluations. There are 3 methods of evaluations. This particular one that I took is called the Danielson Group. And in the Danielson Group, it says that they honor the constructivist view of teaching and learning. That tells me that this is going to be real fuzzy. I did want to point out the data warehouse. We have a data warehouse of which all these groups are going to put this is information into the warehouse. You have Department of Early Learning. This is actually Kentucky, so their acronyms are a little different. You have K-12, Department of Early Learning. You have higher education. You have your CPE, for those of you who have continuing professional education. And you have your workforce, your employers. They're going to put information into the data bank, the data warehouse. And it can be retrieved by any one of those groups and more. If you really want to know about data tracking, I suggest you go to a website called Data Quality Campaign. Data Quality Campaign has a nice map, and it tells you where every state is and how far along they are. So this website's goal is to make sure that all 50 states get in line with the right outcomes and all change laws to do the tracking correctly. I did want to point this out because there is a board of directors, and Rob McKenna now sits as the chairman of the board of directors of Data Quality Campaign, who's in charge of making sure we all do our tracking. When you create laws, I like to call it casing the joint. When you want to have a solution, you have to know what you're going to fix. You have to analyze the system. You have to understand the big picture of where they're going, know the players, know the stakeholders, and then read in between the lines. Actually read the words. Words have meaning in laws, and sometimes words are slipped in there because they're hoping you're going to be confused and not understand their true meaning. There are a couple of laws right now in process. It was mentioned before, Senate Bill 6030 and House Bill 2165. Those 2 laws are to undo Common Core. But they didn't case the joint real well. So there are some things in that law that will have to change, and we have been working with both Senators Chase and Roach, and they said we've got a year, we can change it. So the bill numbers are probably going to come back next year, and that is something that we continue working on. And if you come to the hearing, you can voice your concerns on all the different issues to make sure they hear it. I'm hoping all of you will come to the hearing in some format. I believe with activism, every one of you has a role. Whether you actually get in your car and show up in Olympia, or whether you make your phone calls, and whether you write your letters and emails. Every one of us can help out. When I say come to the hearing, it's not just physically coming, it's telling your legislators, I want you at that hearing. And following up and saying, did you go to that hearing? It's to make them aware that you care about this issue. It's to write your letters and saying, this is something we don't want. If we can show this year that Common Core is something that resonates with a lot of people, then it will come back next year. If people don't show up at the hearing, if people don't make their phone calls and say, I don't like Common Core, then it may die. So we really have to be that squeaky wheel and let people know that we are concerned about it. Another thing that you can do if you are concerned about education issues, in the back there I have Education Resource Network. I created a nonprofit last year, and yes, I did get IRS approval. So I do have my determination letter, and we're on our way. The mission is primarily, what I want to do is to be able to help out parents navigate through the system, be there to answer questions. If a parent says, I want to homeschool, try to help them in that direction. It really is from a conservative, very focused on family values point of view. It's the only nonprofit of its kind in this Northwest, I believe, that is actually out there helping families instead of telling them, you should do Common Core. Most nonprofits are pro-reform, we're not. And the other thing I'd like to do eventually is to be able to collect enough funds that I can help someone get started with their homeschooling, purchase books, pay some mother who wants to do tutoring services. And I do have some relationships with some tutoring services and some other groups, co-ops, to get started, that I could fund their beginnings. That's what I'd like to do. And also there's a big issue with preschools and early learning daycares. For those of you who have church daycares, there's certain laws that if they pass, your church daycares are going to go completely secular, and they're going to be doing Common Core light. They're going to be doing baby core. That's if they take state money. Doesn't matter if they're a private school, doesn't matter if they're a church. They're still going to be doing that. The best way to get out of it is that if we can have some kind of funding mechanism so that low-income people that need a little bit of help can get private funding and not have to go through the government. That will free up their daycares so that their daycares don't have to do Common Core. So this is the kinds of things that I would like to do in the future, and I'm getting started now, so spread the word if anyone wants to help out an organization. We're here. We're also, side note, we're doing the PGA golf tournament concession stand, so if any of you want to have free entry into the Chambers golf course and work an 8-hour shift, come see me. I'll sign you up. The last slide is get informed, show up at events and share your information, and here's some good websites to go to. Now I'm going to take questions, and hopefully I answered some of your other questions. You have a question back there.
How many states have turned the Common Core down so far?
Other than that, there's actually several states that have legislation problems. I feel like saying 8 to 10 are still not doing anything. And most of the other states, which means about 35 states, are in progress of trying to do something. And I think only about a handful, about 5 or 6, have actually turned it down. But a great place to go to is a website called Truth in American Education. Truth in American Education has all that information. I think I've got it up here, yeah. .org. That they have a map that they just updated last week or so, that put in all the new information on where the states are. Back there?
How does Common Core affect homeschooling? Does it at all?
Put it this way. It affects homeschooling if you let it. Okay. By law, you don't have to do you can do what you want to do. But many homeschoolers are feeling pressured that, oh my goodness, if the SAT changes to Common Core, then my kids are going to fail. Or they may find that it's very difficult to buy textbooks. And so I would say we should not cave in to any pressures, and we should always look for something different. If the SAT and college entrance exams do change, that they will have to accept Common Core assessments, like such as the Smarter Balance or the PARC, I pretty much feel safe in saying that the colleges are going to look at those results and put it in the nearest trash can. Because those tests are meaningless. And just like the WASO, when you take your SAT, your ACT, and your WASO test, that the colleges would look at the WASO and kind of discard that, and they focus more on the SAT and ACT. If the SAT and ACT start changing because David Coleman, who is the head of the College Board, is claiming to be one of the authors of the Common Core, English Language Arts, and he's committed to putting SAT on a Common Core path. The reality is going to be that the colleges are going to say, I can't use this information. They're going to be out for a while, but I believe in America and the free market, somebody's going to design a new test that can be used. That's what we should focus on. But if the homeschoolers and private schools cave, then there's no incentive. So if the homeschoolers and private schools say, we don't want to do that, and stand firm, I believe that's the best hope, because the reality is it's not going to work, and that someone's going to come through with a new way of testing. Currently, colleges are hiring people, creating a new department on how to evaluate homeschoolers, because they know that that's where the future might be for their better kids. Yes.
Have some of the states pushed back those few that have done that, how to do it?
Yes, and that is exactly what I believe is happening, is that many states are pushing back, and the other states are learning from that. However, I believe Washington State is unique, sorry to say. I was in Idaho 2013, and I happened to be in the Idaho State Board of Education presentation on the testing system, the assessment piece. And they're explaining how to all the new teachers in Idaho, how this new test was not going to have any right or wrong answers, that the math test was not about math, and the English language arts test was not about spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Those are direct quotes. And he started explaining what the test was going to look like. So at break time, I went to this facilitator and I said, you know, I'm from Washington State, and I kind of recognize what you were saying because we've been living with the WASO for many years. And the guy said to me, well, he said that, I said, could be because the contract for the Smarter Balance and National Test for Common Core, the contract was awarded to Washington State to start creating that test. So I said, well, maybe it's because Washington State got awarded the contract to write the test for the nation. And the guy said to me, well, perhaps Washington State got awarded the contract because it's the only state that knew how to do it right.
Oh.
That's what he said to me. And that's when what I'm thinking is Washington State has been a little bit more on the path of reform education because we had people like Terry Bergson and Dr. Shirley McEwen, remember, the National Governance Conference lady? She was in our state designing our WASO test. So we were ahead of the crowd in doing what would be the perfect Common Core example. We've been doing that early on since 1993. And so I believe that as other states started taking the test, they knew what real tests looked like. And so they started saying, they rejected it. They said, we don't want to do this. And so other states started seeing the Washington State education system and rejecting it. However, it's going to be taking longer for Washington State to reject it because we're so used to it. It's going to take more. But we do have a lot of lava lamps in Washington State, and a lot of our leaders are lava lamps. So as other states start rejecting it, it's not because the logic or anything, it's because, oh my gosh, everyone else is rejecting it, maybe we should too. So that's why I went to Idaho and to Oregon to help them reject it, because I figured if they rejected it, it would be better for a lava lamp for our state to reject it.
Can we make this the last one?
Are the elite schools, prep schools on the East Coast, and like Punahou, Nialani, and Hawaii, are they using anything based upon these kinds of standards?
They don't have to, again, because the private schools don't have to, but many of them do because it's the thing to do. Not necessarily, and they might be, but they also might not be using all the curriculum. They may say they're doing the standards, but they're actually teaching real stuff. So it's all over the place. In private schools, by the way, many of them are jumping on board the Common Core bandwagon. If your kids go to private school and you need some help, come see me. I'll explain what's going on with that later. All right, thank you, and I'm going to stick around with it.
So Sharon is going to be in the back, and she's got a world of information to share with you during our unstructured time, if you'd like. We're doing actually pretty good, despite the fact that we didn't have a flag and we didn't have microphones, and that we had to wait on hotel staff, and that we brought in a lot of different subjects. And I beg you, if we hit you with subject after subject after subject, it's because it's our duty to share with each other as many possible infringements on freedom as possible. Now, you don't have to, we're not asking you to take action on every single one of them, because that will just make you go home and say, oh, why the heck should I even try? We're bringing you various subjects so that you might find one that says, on that subject, I have an interest and I can do something. All right, so yes, sir, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make a comment regarding your presentation and Senator Pam Roach and the upcoming hearing. Senator Pam Roach, I met
Thank you very much. All right, you are 5 minutes from standing up and stretching and getting around and talking to each other. First of all, I want to remind you that we have these little envelopes, and these envelopes are the perfect size for putting cash in. Right? So if you want to continue to have this beautiful meeting place and not be in somebody's barn, this would be a good time to support that. Several times we have tried to make Kitsap County a charter county. Now, in our Washington State Constitution, charter counties are treated with much more autonomy than non-charter counties. And that effort is being brought forward again. One of the people that is interested in that effort is Gary Welsh, and he wants to assemble some of the folks who are knowledgeable about previous efforts. And to tell us about it for a few minutes is Mr. Gary Welsh.
Hi. For those of you who remember me from last year, I was very much involved in that. I kind of dropped out. The reason why I did, I was investigating Kitsap County's relationship with the Kitsap Rifle and Revolver Club. And it involved that it required that I had to have a little bit of autonomy with that. The result of that was I found out that Kitsap County is pretty corrupt. Yeah,
No.
The other part, though, that astounded me is we have an out-of-control bureaucracy. We have a population of approximately 253,000, and Kitsap County's budget for 2014 was $343 million. And the reason why that is because we have these bureaucracies, and the reason why the Kitsap Rifle and Revolver Club was having problems was that we had department heads in these bureaucracies that had no control. They just were running rampant with whatever they wanted to do. So the only way that we could stop that is we have to change the way that we have our commissioners. Right now we're going off an old system that was created with the Constitution back in the 1880s that allows us to have 3 commissioners. What we really need is to create a new system where we are electing our commissioners a little bit differently, bringing them in, and we can also basically write what's called a charter, and that is a Kitsap County Constitution that will allow us to fix a lot of these problems and get control of this. I've often said to you guys that it's really hard to control things on the national level and even harder to change things in the state, but we can change Kitsap County. We really, really can. There have been 2 efforts made. The last one was in the early 2000s. Both of them failed, and the reason why I feel that they have failed is because of what's called the ornament clause. You start with something and everybody wants to put their ornaments on it. Well, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this. And pretty soon it gets so overloaded that the citizens won't pass. So what I'm trying to create is a charter that's going to be very, very basic. All it says is this is how we're going to elect our commissioners, and this is what it's going to look like. And more importantly, this is what Kitsap County's budget's going to look like. So what I'm looking for is a committee to get things started. I need folks who have been involved. Bob Knight, I spoke to him pretty much extensively. He knew a lot of people, but I'm sure there's someone in this room that was involved in the last effort. I'd like for those folks to kind of get with me so we can find out what went wrong. And then secondly, if you are really concerned about what is going on in this county and you want to change it for the better, let's start with creating a charter for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gary. All righty. So I'm going to check my little cheat sheet, make sure we didn't forget anything. All righty. Once we adjourn, please go over there and take whatever you want from our friends table. We have lots of stuff over there that's interesting, including pins. Who doesn't want a pin? And I found out it's been a long time since they've written, so you might have to scratch them with them a little while to get them to write. Back here we have the initiative for the reapportionment of electoral votes from the state of Washington. I personally support that, and I invite you to do it as well. Please go back there and look at some of that awesome bling. I was just checking it out. It's really good. And then our lending table over here. So you've got plenty of time to see all that stuff because they're not going to kick us out of here until 9:30. Does anybody have anything else before we adjourn? Well, then we are adjourned. Thank you.